Greetings, Starfighters. Welcome to part 2 of my 3-part series on my top 10 Star Trek Voyager episodes in air date order. I apologize in advance if my delivery in this episode seems a little off. That's because, unlike with, pretty much every video I've put out to date, this is actually my third time having to record these. Long story. Let's not dwell on that. Let's just go ahead and jump into the first 5 of my top 10. Number 1, Faces. Original air date, May 8th, 1995. Plot summary. In an attempt to develop a cure for the phage, a Vidian doctor captures Torres and splits her into 2 beings. One being her human side, the other being her Klingon side. The thing that immediately jumps to my mind when thinking about this Season 1 episode is that it serves as an excellent example of the difference between soft science fiction and hard science fiction. I mean, there is no logical extrapolation one can make from our current understanding of biology that makes what happens to B'Elanna Torres in this episode even remotely plausible. But because this episode, and Star Trek as a whole by and large, is soft sci-fi, it doesn't bother me or most fans of the show either, because everything around it is so good. First off, Roxanne Dawson gets an all-too-rare chance to be something other than a one-note character. Anytime an actor has to play off themselves in a work is a challenge, unless they just happen to have a twin, and doing so when you only have a week to 10 days to film an episode really only adds to that. She rises to the challenge, however, as the scenes where fully human B'Elanna and fully Klingon B'Elanna are interacting are great to watch. Perhaps not on par with the acting Robert Picardo would be doing with himself several seasons later in the episode Lifeline, but not bad at all. The villain of this episode is also suitably creepy, which is another point in this episode's favor. His infatuation with B'Elanna is played exactly as that. No misunderstood nice guy who deserves romance here. Unlike some romantic movie protagonists who come across as creepy by accident, Sulan, played by Brian Markinson, who also plays Voyager crew member Peter Durst in the episode, tries to be the sympathetic villain, but the audience is cued in pretty early on that this is all in his head. You may not think he's a monster, but we know he is. Speaking of Durst, the death of the Gold Shirt this episode is actually pretty shocking, not just for how gruesome it is by 1990s network television standards, but also for the fact that since we'd seen his character in another episode prior to this one, it wasn't a given that he was dead meat. He wasn't your Ensign Ricky. Yes, I know, I used a Family Guy joke, I'm sorry. But anyway, it's only a shame that Voyager didn't do this kind of thing more often. Things like this only serve to highlight the great potential this show had, but all too often failed to live up to. If this episode suffers from anything, it's the same problem that the first 3 seasons of Voyager in general had, and that the Vidians were not the most well-utilized antagonists in Star Trek history. More so than the Kazon, certainly, and if it weren't for Deep Space Nine, the Ferengi would have suffered a similar fate, but still. Apart from this episode, the only time these mass organ harvesters ever really felt like a threat was in Deadlock, an episode I put in the honorable mention section of the previous episode. Those issues aside, though, this episode makes the list for its atmosphere, its exploration of B'Elanna Torres as a character, something we'd see far too little of over the next 7 years, and for a villain worthy of one of Stuart Gordon's H.P. Lovecraft adaptations. This episode, along with another honorable mention, State of Flux, are why, for all its faults, I actually rank Season 1 of Voyager higher than the Season 1s of both Next Generation and Enterprise. Random facts about this episode. By playing both Lieutenant Peter Durst and Sulan, Brian Markinson is the first of only 2 actors to play 2 different, completely unrelated characters in a single episode of Star Trek. The other was Jeffrey Combs, playing both Weyoun and Brunt in the Deep Space Nine episode The Dogs of War. This episode was nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Makeup for a Series, but it didn't win. A year after this episode first aired, an action figure of the fully Klingon B'Elanna Torres was released by Playmates Toys, complete with 3 Klingon hand weapons and a Vidian bioscanner/phaser. This was not only the first episode-specific Star Trek Voyager action figure, but was also the only one to be released in 1996. Number 2, The Thaw, originally aired April 29th, 1996. Plot summary. Voyager finds a group of people connected in stasis chambers, and something has gone terribly wrong. Sorry. This episode is a work of surreal genius with a great guest star. That I, to date, have never seen it on any magazine or website's top 10 Voyager episodes list is downright criminal. They'll include Endgame, the Trek finale that only avoids the fate of worst finale because 1. TOS never got a proper ending, and 2. Because Enterprise's These Are the Voyages exists. They'll include Endgame, but not The Thaw. Shameful. What makes The Thaw stand out from other quote-unquote mindfuck episodes, a frequent occurrence during the time Brannon Braga worked on Star Trek, to varying degrees of success, is the juxtaposition of the bright, colorful setting with the ominous atmosphere. I mean, keep in mind, a main character is nearly decapitated by a group of people dressed like circus performers in a guillotine that is painted with bright colors. Now, all of this easily could have crossed over into the realm of the ridiculous, but a combination of direction, editing, and a top-notch performance by Michael McKean, one of our most underrated living actors today, in my opinion, elevates this episode to one of Voyager's best. I didn't rank these top 10 episodes, obviously, but if I had, The Thaw would be in the top half easy, maybe even the top 3. McKean in particular deserves all the praise he gets from the people who do appreciate this episode, by just how effortlessly his character, who never gets a name, but that only helps add to the atmosphere of the episode, slides back and forth from joviality to menacing and selling both. Not only that, but at the very end of the episode, when he's been played and is facing non-existence, his fear also comes across as genuine, and the last scene when fake Janeway responds to the clown's fear by simply whispering, "I know," is just one of, if not the best endings in Voyager's entire run. If at any point in the future you decide to do a Voyager rewatch and want to skip this one, please don't. Look past the pastels and you'll see a story that easily could have done just as well on TOS. If they were lucky enough to get the right guest star, anyway. The only bad thing I can really think of with this episode is the fact that it's sandwiched between two horrible ones. Innocence aired before, and Tuvix aired after. That's... Okay, yeah, suddenly I see why not enough people like this episode. It got the stink of the other two on it. Random facts about this episode. The stasis beds from this installment were later reused in the episode 1, from near the end of Season 4, an episode that focuses on 7 of 9. I find that confluence of numbers funny. Sue me. This episode's opening scene, in which Harry Kim and Tom Paris hold an idle conversation before Chakotay calls them to the bridge, was filmed as part of the episode Death Wish, another episode for my honorable mentions, but was later edited out and reused here due to its generic nature. Number 3, Warlord, originally aired November 20th, 1996. Plot summary. A dying warlord takes over Kess's body and is determined to retake his home planet. So, hey, truth in advertising. Yes, I am aware that lavishing praise on a Kess-centric episode, given Jennifer Leon's recent problems, is a bit awkward, but this is still a solid episode nonetheless. Not the least of which is because they actually gave Leon something to do other than encouraging the EMH or putting up with Neelix's possessive bullshit. Speaking of which, that's one major point in this episode's favor right there. This is the episode where Kess breaks up with Neelix. And it sticks all the way till the end when Kess leaves and 7 of 9 comes in. I know, a Voyager episode having long-term consequences? I'm shocked too. Possession episodes are always a gamble, and in my opinion, they fail more often than not. But Warlord works partly through how well Leon plays not only the titular Warlord controlling her body, but also the moments when Kess's personality starts to slip through. It's subtle at first, which is what you want to build tension, but becomes more pronounced as the episode goes on. And it all culminates in a scene that is acted fairly well, not stellar, but well, but it is seriously bolstered by the framing and the editing, and the brilliant visual cue that as Kess starts to regain more and more control over her body from the Warlord, the battlescape of her mind starts to look less and less like his palace, and more like her quarters on Voyager. It's not shoved in your face, but it's also not so subtle as to be possibly missed. The editor, more so than even Jennifer Lien, though she did a more than adequate job of this episode, is the hero of this piece. I know I run the risk of selling her short by saying that, but I think it would behoove us to more often remember that TV, and film too, but these videos are about a TV show, is a collaborative effort. Lien's performance could have been, in theory, even better than it was in the actual episode. Not that I'm saying it was bad at all. But if the editing was bad, that wouldn't have been enough. Random facts about the episode. This episode aired just 2 days before the theatrical release of Star Trek First Contact. The rifles the Ilari guards in the Imperial Hall are armed with were reuses of Jem'Hadar rifles from Deep Space Nine. Gotta save money on the props, right? Number 4, Year of Hell, Parts 1 and 2, originally aired November 5th, 1997 and November 12th, 1997. Plot summary. Voyager comes across a Krenim time ship that is wiping whole species from existence by changing the existing timeline. And I imagine the captain of the time ship calls people dumbass while he does it. That was my obligatory That 70s Show reference. Don't expect another one. The reset button ending is a tool like any other in fiction. There's a tendency among geeks to reflexively bash on shows for using it, and to be fair, there are shows that lean heavily on it, constantly returning things to the status quo at the end of the episode, arc, or season. Voyager certainly relied on it too much, but that said, I really didn't mind it in this two-parter from Season 4. Do I kind of wish they'd gone with Brannon Braga's original idea for a season-long arc for this? Well, yes. But sadly, that's not what we got. We only got the two-parter, and all things considered, it's not terrible. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's good. So good, in fact, as to be on a top 10 list. You know, for all the grief Brannon Braga, justifiably, gets for his missteps on Voyager and Enterprise, it can be easy to forget that he was involved with some good episodes, too. Well, not so much on Enterprise, but on Voyager and on Next Generation. As if to be really said it best in a line from the Scorpion review. Oh, by the way, since apparently every VidMe downloader in the world stopped working since I made the last Voyager video, I'm not going to be able to play a clip for you, so...
It's become my opinion over the years that Brannon Braga is kind of a multiplying factor. When you partner him with a stronger writer, you get an even stronger script. And when you partner him with someone like Rick Berman, you get a season of Enterprise so awful, the DVD should come with a coupon for a ladder and a noose.
Braga's idea was bold and easily on par with some of the great stories being done on that other Star Trek show that happened to be on the air at the time, that was thriving, in terms of story, if not in ratings, when it tested the boundaries of Gene Roddenberry's vision. Now, maybe it would have failed, maybe the season-long Year of Hell would have sucked, who knows. But as my love of the movie Southland Tales will tell you, I'll take an ambitious failure over a mediocre success more often than not. The missed opportunities aside, though, this two-parter is another of those stories that are good, but do sting a little on account of what they showed us. This show could have been more often, that it was all too often not allowed to be. Yes, the time stuff is wonky, but let's be real here. When isn't it? Even going outside of Star Trek, you know, the Flash, Back to the Future movies, the first two Terminator films, also have all sorts of plot holes created by time travel. But you know why people don't complain about those anywhere near as much as they do with more hated time travel stories, like Voyager's own finale, or the temporal Cold War stuff on Enterprise, movies like 13 Going on 30, or the failed adaptation of A Sound of Thunder, or the third Terminator movie, and there's any number of factors in this. But in my personal opinion, it can be boiled down to this. The best time travel stories are those that aren't about the time travel. Back to the Future and Star Trek IV work because of the humor. Terminator 2 works because of the fantastic action set pieces and the at-the-time groundbreaking visual effects work. Army of Darkness works largely due to the charisma of the lead actor. The common thread is those stories use time travel, but they aren't really about time travel. There's kind of an underlying, yeah, we know, just roll with it in the writing. And that applies to Year of Hell as well. Another major point in this two-parter's favor is the truly sympathetic villain behind all the time-altering shenanigans, Anorax, played by beloved character actor Kurtwood Smith. Hence the obligatory That 70s Show reference earlier. From RoboCop to That 70s Show, Smith always brings a certain charm to the character he plays, even when they're the bad guys, and Year of Hell is no different. Although what he's doing is clearly wrong, you can understand why Anorax goes as far as he does. That's what makes a good antagonist. Simply doing it for the lulz just doesn't really cut it outside the old Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, heck, even most current shows targeted towards any kid old enough to go to the bathroom on their own doesn't go with the mustache twirler anymore. Throw in some great character moments and interactions that wouldn't get to happen under normal circumstances on the show, and you've got some good Star Trek right there, even with the reset button. Random facts about the episode. After being rejected as a season-long arc, the story was also going to be the third season finale, but that got changed as well. There were some minor rewrites, with many of Kess's lines being given to 7 of 9. The basic methodology of Anorax's weapon is almost exactly that used by the Eternals in Isaac Asimov's End of Eternity from 1955. The key difference is that the Eternals are affecting particular centuries of Earth's history, including suppressing spaceflight, rather than the entire galaxy. Number 5. Mortal Coil. Originally aired December 17, 1997. Plot summary. Neelix experiences a crisis of faith where, after being dead for nearly 19 hours, 7 of 9 revives him using her Borg technology. On awakening, Neelix has no memory of experiencing the Talaxian afterlife and begins to doubt everything his culture believes. This episode is a win-win in a lot of ways. If you hate Neelix, you get to see him die, even though he gets better. But if you like Neelix, you get to see Ethan Phillips at what is probably his best in the entire show's run. Not bad, considering this episode didn't exactly have the cards stacked in its favor. Last-minute rewrites, a complete plot change ordered from up top, more on that in a bit, focused on arguably one of the most divisive characters in the history of the entire franchise. On paper, this seems like an episode that, if it was lucky, would be doomed to mediocrity, and at worst end up on the same lists as Trek episodes like Prophet and Lace, A Night in Sickbay, or Code of Honor. Well, okay, it probably wouldn't have been that bad if everything had gone sideways, but still. However, major props to the writers for having Neelix's drama in this episode stem from his character's previously established background, and not something invented for this episode that never gets brought up again. Not that I support a slavish devotion to continuity that hinders a franchise more than helps it, mind you, but for stuff like this, hell to the yes. It was way back in Season 1 where we first learned about Neelix losing family, including his sister in a war. The episode where we were told about that was pretty bad, but still. Also, it was a very bold move on the episode's writers' part to very heavily imply the afterlife doesn't exist. Granted, Neelix's actions in the last act of the episode would make a lot less sense if he'd seen the Talaxian afterlife while being dead for almost a whole day, but still, I'm saying but still a lot, aren't I? That's like my new anyway. Granted, Trek has always had a pretty strong atheistic undercurrent, given Gene Roddenberry's own disbelief, but I don't think it was ever quite this blunt about it. At least not after the TOS era, where TV audiences kinda needed to be spoon-fed the message, since TV fiction was still relatively new at the time. Barely college age if it were a person. And as for Rick Berman vetoing Brian Fuller's idea for this episode, this is a rare instance where I actually back Berman's call when it comes to Voyager. I mean, yikes. Now, how much of that is me legitimately thinking the Neelix story was better, and how much of it is me learning about that original plan for the episode after I started working on my whole 7 of 9 Samantha Wildman fic is anyone's guess. For those who may not be aware of what I'm talking about, let's go to the words of then Voyager staff writer Brian Fuller.
We were going to do this Pet Cemetery episode where Ensign Wildman goes on a shuttle mission and dies, and 7 of 9 brings her back to life using Borg technology. Except now, she's a zombie mom. She's not all there. Wildman's more connected with death than life, and her only link to her life is through her daughter. She wants to kill her daughter, though, to bring her back to life so she can share that experience with her. Really a creepy, morbid story. I thought, this is going to be so much fun to write. There has been nothing on Star Trek remotely like it ever. So we broke the story, and everyone was pretty happy about it.
Obviously not everybody was happy, though, as Fuller later was told that both Rick Berman and executives at Paramount thought the idea was too extreme. I'm kind of inclined to agree. The character of Naomi Wildman was only like 2 years old at the time, but being played as about 4 or 5 because of the half-alien rapid maturing process thing, even though she was in utero for a year. Sorry, just remembering all that makes me think of the biology just filed assault charges joke from Nash's Doctor Who, Delta, and the Bannerman review. So, just to address a certain question I'm sure I'd get at some point, yes, I do know that this is the only episode where Seven of Nine and Ensign Wildman shared any screen time. However, if you remember the first part of this trilogy of videos, you'll remember that this episode did not, in fact, inspire a fire of devotion. Funnily enough, I'd forgotten the two had interacted on screen at all when I first got the idea for that story. I only realized it when I rewatched the show on Netflix for the purposes of writing that story. Random facts about the episode. The Samantha Wildman plot was actually not the very first iteration of the story idea. Freelance writer Kathy Hankinson pitched an idea that involved a death fetishist with an immortal regenerating body who, merely for fun, repeatedly fooled the EMH into killing him. That also might have been a good episode, but I still think that taking a chance and trying to make a good Neelix episode for only the 3rd time in 4 years was the right call. Neelix's experience in this episode are somewhat followed up on in the 5th season episode Night, in which he is diagnosed with nihilophobia, the fear of nothingness, as Voyager travels through a starless black sector dubbed the Void. Of course, little things like this only make the big and less forgivable continuity flubs throughout the series stand out all the more. And one more fact, so as not to end this episode on a down note, in the scene where Neelix goes to talk to Seven in Astrometrics near the end of the episode, one of the screens displays the well-known and oft-reprinted image of the Eagle Nebula taken by the Hubble telescope.